I will give a quick introduction for Stan Longhofer. He comes from the Center for Real Estate at Wichita State University. I will say I'm happy he's been my partner in crime all these years now coming out here. He's been very dedicated every single time coming out and talking about it. He's got a great website and great data. It's always insightful. We all have houses or renting, so it involves all of us. So it's always intriguing to hear what you have to say. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. That's very kind of you. I have really enjoyed the opportunity to come out and to engage the different parts of the state. And it's one of the brainchilds that Jeremy had was these regional economic outlook conferences. And I'm so glad to see that they've been so successful. We miss those of you who are not with us in person. We miss you. And we'll look forward to seeing you all back here in this room next year, because it really is great to have this dialogue and have this discussion. And so, as Jeremy said, I am here to present. Every year we do an annual housing forecast for the state of Kansas. We forecast the state as a whole and the large metropolitan areas across the state. But in addition to the formal forecast, which you can find copies of those forecast publications at the back table here, you also have at your place a copy of the Ford County Housing Outlook. And we prepare these smaller publications for 22 different counties across the state, essentially all of the micropolitan areas like Ford County. And so we hope you find that useful and the information in it valuable for you. And we have to give a special thanks to Security First Title in Wichita. They have offices here in Dodge City, over in Garden City as well. They've been friends of the Center for Real Estate for a long time, and their donation is what makes it possible for us to prepare these printed publications, make them available for you. So we're very grateful to them. We're also grateful to the Kansas Association of Realtors and all of the realtor boards across the state. And that would include the Dodge City Board of Realtors, the Great Plains Board of Realtors, the Southwest Kansas Association of Realtors down in Liberal, all of the realtor associations across the state. We have a contract with the Kansas Association of Realtors whereby we access multiple listing service data for every single MLS system across the state. We are then able to compile them to create definitive statewide MLS statistics, which is released every month by the Kansas Association of Realtors. And then we also prepare monthly statistical reports for all of the local boards. And so the data that you see in this county outlook comes from that partnership. And if you contact the Dodge City Board of Realtors, they can give you more details on a monthly basis of what's going on in your local market. So I'd encourage you to reach out to them. And again, we're grateful for that partnership. If it weren't for that agreement that we have, we wouldn't have access to the data that we need in order to do this forecast. So every year when I start my housing forecast, I always look at two fundamentals, the labor market and the mortgage market. I ask, do people have jobs and are they confident in their employment situation so that they'll be interested in buying a home? And then can they get the financing that they need in order to be able to finance that purchase? And this is a slide from my presentation last year. And I said, the fundamentals are really very solid. Mortgage financing is cheap and widely available, and labor markets are fairly healthy. And so I said, this is really a very solid situation. But I added a little caveat at the end. I said, somehow it feels like maybe there's something hovering over our shoulders, and that somehow all of this could change very quickly. Maybe that's just the innate Great Plains, a certain pessimism of, there's another drought coming at some point, or something bad will have to happen. I had no idea what was going to happen. No clue whatsoever about how bad and how quickly things could get in terms of our economic situation. Jeremy, I think, said earlier today that no one, when you were asked last year, what could be the trigger of the next recession? Absolutely none of us said that it would be a pandemic, right? That was just the furthest thing from our imagination. And so to summarize the labor market side of things, Jeremy, I'm not going to include any slides on that. Jeremy talked about the employment forecast. Right now, if you looked at the housing market, you would not know that we're in the middle of a recession. Okay? You just has not shown up at all. Housing markets have been essentially unaffected thus far, at least in terms of demand for home purchases. But my concern is that as Jeremy talked, he said, early on, the sectors that have been impacted most heavily by the job losses have been in like leisure and hospitality and in service sector jobs that are lower skilled jobs. And that as we've moved forward, we've seen a little bit more filtering of that into higher wage jobs and into other sectors. He's also expressed some real concerns about the long-term structural issues in the manufacturing sectors. And my concern is that we haven't really felt the impact of the labor market stress in the housing market yet, but that will come forward as we go into next year and the following year. So I'll talk about that when I get to my forecast, but I wanted to give that brief overview before we move forward. The second fundamental is the mortgage market and what's happening with mortgage rates. And although we've seen some reports over the last few months of underwriting standards getting a little bit tighter, it hasn't been significant. And in contrast, a year ago at this conference, I said, there's no way rates are getting any lower. We don't think they're going to go up, but there's no way they're getting lower. And of course, as soon as I make a definitive statement, the economic gods play havoc on it, and they come and tell you, no, you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. As if anybody needed to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. And so mortgage rates have dropped over the course of this year pretty dramatically. The one thing that I want to highlight on here is that the reason that rates have dropped over the course of this pandemic has been because the Federal Reserve has begun renewing its purchasing activity of mortgage-backed securities. And one of the things you'll notice on here, on this slide, you can kind of see my little dots that are going up here. The blue line at the bottom here is the 5/1 adjustable mortgage rate. That's a loan that has an interest rate that's fixed for 5 years, and then after that it adjusts annually. And that interest rate is typically lower than the 30-year fixed mortgage rate because lenders don't bear as much interest rate risk. The loan is only fixed for 5 years. After that, as market rates move, the rate on that loan adjusts. Okay? Normally, we see that a spread between the 30-year fixed rate and the 5/1 adjustable. But over the past 6 months or so, we've seen that spread drop to essentially zero. And again, that is reflecting the fact that where the Fed has been purchasing has been those long-term fixed-rate mortgages. So we've been driving down those interest rates much more aggressively than we've been driving down shorter-term interest rates. So I said the labor market hasn't been affecting things very much. So we're really seeing strong demand from the labor market side of things, and then mortgage rates have gotten very inexpensive. And so both of those continue to stimulate demand in the housing market. At the same time, what we're seeing is that sales activity has essentially plateaued. And so the blue bars on this chart represent monthly home sales reported by all of the MLS systems across Kansas. And then the orange line is the moving average of those sales. And so it allows us to get through the seasonality where we see sales go up in the spring and they tail off in the fall. And again, we had some fairly healthy, slow but steady increases in home sales activity. And then over the last 2 years, 3 years or so, we've essentially plateaued without much increase, without any decreasing. And the reason for that is because of tight inventories. And I'm going to show that here in a minute. But before I do, I wanted to say what's been happening with the Dodge City area. So once again, these are the sales as reported by the Dodge City Board of Realtors. The bars represent monthly sales. Somebody was concerned earlier that it was annual sales. No, they're monthly sales. And then the orange line is the moving average of those. And you can see that over the 2019, we had kind of a nice little increase in home sales activity. And we've sort of averaged out at around 22, 23 sales per month on average. Again, there's seasonality in here, so it moves around quite a bit. But a highest level of sales activity in the Dodge City area that we've seen in recent history, at least. So I said that sales have plateaued statewide. But why, if I said the labor markets haven't really shown any impact on the housing market, and mortgage rates are low, we have really strong demand, why aren't we seeing home sales activity take off more? And the reason is because our inventories of the supply of homes available for sale is incredibly tight. And so we measure this, it's a measure of balance in the housing market, with a number that we call months supply. And to do this, we take the number of homes that are available for sale, active listings, and divide it by the average pace of sales over the past year. And so, for example, if there are 1,000 homes available for sale on the market, and we sell on average 200 homes a month, then we would say 1,000 divided by 200, we have a 5-month supply of homes available on the market. And generally, we think that a balanced market is a market in which we have between a 4 and a 6-month supply of homes available. That provides enough inventory for there to be the regular churning, for you to be able to sell your house, find another house, move, and facilitate that turnover in the housing market. Above a 6-month supply, and we tend to think it leans a little bit more towards being a buyer's market, where there's going to be some downward pressure on home prices and more competition among sellers to try and find somebody to buy their home. Below a 4-month supply, we begin to say that it looks more like a seller's market. And what you can see from this chart, the yellow line is the state of Kansas. And you can see that ever since 2015, we've dropped down below that 4-month supply threshold. And indeed, recently here this year, we've now dropped down below a 2-month supply. These are incredibly tight inventories. Indeed, in some markets in the state, we have less than a 1-month supply of homes available for sale right now. There was somebody who was sitting, was it you that told the story of your son who sold a house in Wichita? You want to say that again for everybody, what happened to him just a month or two ago?
Sure. Put it on the market on Friday afternoon and had, within 4 hours, had 8 offers.
Put it on the market on a Friday afternoon. Within 4 hours, he had 8 offers. My guess is that many of them were above the asking price, and that deal closed and sold very, very quickly. That's not an anomaly right now in many parts of the state. We're seeing that in Dodge City as well, is what one of the other comments. And in Finney County over in Garden. It's really tight inventories. And so one of the things that's interesting here, you'll notice the orange line on this chart is the Dodge City MLS numbers, and where it bounces a little more volatile, it bounces around a little bit more in terms of the month's supply. But you can see there as well that over the past year, there's been a sharp decrease in month's supply in this area. And again, that's been true across many parts of the state where inventories have gotten much tighter. The last thing I wanted to highlight on this chart is you'll notice that the blue line is Kansas. And you will see that in March, April, May kind of area, right during the period of the shutdown, there was a really sharp increase in months' supply nationwide. And that's because, unlike Kansas, in many parts of the country, real estate activities were not deemed essential activities. But when the shutdowns began to occur and we're trying to decide which activities need to stay open because they're really essential, Governor Kelly, wisely in my view, stated that real estate activities are an essential activity. And that's not necessarily that it's absolutely essential. Well, if you're actually in a situation where you need to sell your home, you've lost your job or something else has happened and you need to sell, not having access to the services of a realtor could really compound your problems. But the other piece of it is that real estate activities are not likely to be activities in the midst of a pandemic that are super spreaders, right? We have ways to do virtual home tours. We have ways to separate people while they're going through this home buying and home selling process, that it's not like we're creating a mass of bodies of people all together in one tight location. And so as a result, we in Kansas did not see a spike in month supply during the shutdowns in any measure the way that the U.S. as a whole did. Now, one of the things that has been true always in real estate markets is that when I come in and I talk about real estate markets, I do this 40,000-foot flyover. And I talk a lot about averages. Michael would say the same thing about ag values as well. You know, nobody owns the average Dodge City home. No one owns the average Garden City home. We all own a home in a neighborhood, in a particular location within that neighborhood. And so there are submarkets in real estate that matter. And one way that I try and get at some differences that may be happening across submarkets is by looking at different price ranges. And so I picked some arbitrary price ranges. I tried to say, what's the lower end of the market? What's the kind of meat of the market, the most popular price ranges? What's the upper middle of the market? And then the high end. And for Dodge City, kind of looking at just the pattern and history of home sales activity and price in different price ranges over the past 5 years or so, I picked price points of $100,000, $175,000, and $250,000. So below $100,000 is the lower end of the market. Between $100,000 and $175,000, that's really the most, the highest volume transactions that happen in that price range. But the next price range is also pretty popular, $175,000 to $250,000. Above 250, you start to see the number of transactions tail off pretty dramatically. And so I called that the upper end of the market. And then I segmented and I calculated the month's supply based on these price ranges. And you could debate what's the right cut points, right? I thought about using a $300,000 cut point, but the orange line, the yellow line on this just got way out of proportion. I couldn't read anything from it. But what you'll notice here, I think, are two things that are interesting. Number one is that the low end of the market, homes priced between $100,000, below $100,000, have actually been pretty flush over a number of years. Okay, there's actually been sort of an excess supply of these homes for a considerable period of time. In contrast, this $100,000 to $175,000 price range has been sitting at the low end of a balanced market for an extended period of time. Yes?
One question I had with regards to the month supply, are we talking about sales that are actually MLS listings?
Yes, so the question is, are these sales MLS listings or do they reflect things that are outside the MLS? Correct. Is that really where your question comes from? These sales are only sales that are reported through a multiple listing service.
Okay, and so that's where I can see discrepancies in our market, because a lot of our sales, unfortunately, are not MLS.
A lot of our new builds are not going through MLS.
Sure.
And we have had a large increase in for sale by owners.
So
that's messing with those numbers.
for the people who are remote, two issues that were raised here by people in the audience. Number one is that that we have a lot of sales that are not being reported through the MLS, and particularly we see that with new home construction, and then a statement that you believe there's been an increase in for sale by owner activity here lately.
Oh, I know.
You know, okay.
I don't believe I know.
She's a licensed realtor here.
No, I believe you with that. I will say, generally, when I've looked at this in the past, and I've not looked Fort County specifically, and because I've been concerned, real estate MLS systems only reflect homes that have been sold using a licensed real estate agent. And you don't have to do that. You can do a for sale by owner. The for sale by owner may or may not end up getting input in the MLS system. Sometimes appraisers come back and input them into the system, to use for comps?
Our appraisers don't have.
Okay. Your appraisers don't have access to the MLS to do that?
And then a big difference that you'll see between us and say Garden and Liberal is the title companies won't do for sale by owners. At least I know for sure in Liberal, I'm not sure in Garden, but our title companies here will.
Okay.
They will run the contracts and they will do all that stuff.
Right, and so the comment there was about whether or not title companies will facilitate and handle, writing up the contract and doing the closing of a for sale by owner deal that doesn't have a realtor on either end of the transaction, the buyer or the seller. What I started to say is that when I've looked at it in the past in other parts of the state, and I have not looked at Ford County specifically, is that when you compare sales validation questionnaires that are filed, so that is every time a parcel sells, you need to report that to the county appraiser's office. To essentially, they use that to help validate and get the data that they use to estimate market values for appraisal for tax purposes. And that reflects every transaction that occurs, but it could be a single-family home sale, it could be a vacant land sale, it could be even a small little sliver of land sold by neighboring parcels and so forth. What we found is that what we've not seen is a significant divergence between the number of sales validation questionnaires filed and MLS activity. So that when MLS home sales go up, we see almost a lockstep increase with sales validation questionnaires being filed and so forth. That's not a perfect measure, but it indicates to me that it's unlikely. So one of the questions that was being raised here was, could we be seeing in this time when inventories are so tight that we're seeing a lot more for sale by owners, and therefore this is underrepresenting the actual number of transactions that are happening? I know that that's not the case in Sedgwick County because I see those sales validation questionnaires every single month. I cannot speak directly to Ford County because I don't see that. So as I usually defer to the local experts when it comes to those kind of questions. And so that may underrepresent what's really happening in terms of the sales activity in this county. Let me think. Oh, so the other thing that I wanted to point out here, which I do think is interesting, and I think it ties with what you were saying here, is that yellow line is the upper end of the market. And again, it's an arbitrary point of list price greater than $250,000. And what we've seen here is a pretty steep decline in those inventories over the past year. And I think what we're seeing in terms of housing markets is twofold things. Number one is the households that are most likely to be home buyers are the least likely to have been detrimentally impacted by the labor market stress. They are more likely to have jobs that are capable of operating remotely or doing something else to be able to maintain that. And so the housing, the demand among people who might be home buyers hasn't been affected as much as other segments of the economy have been affected. Number two, the low interest rates that we're seeing right now, I really think are causing people to stretch. And you mentioned about new home construction not showing up in here. And that's actually true all over the state, that if you look at the number of building permits and you look at the number of new home sales in the MLS, you'd think that we were just way, way overbuilding. But it's because many, many new home sales are never input into the MLS. And and what we're seeing is an awful lot, when I talk about the construction side of things, we're seeing people stretch and we're saying, hey, if I can lock in these low interest rates and get my dream home, whether it's an existing home that's more expensive and in a better neighborhood than I thought I could, or whether it is to build a new home, I want to do that right now while I can take advantage of this situation. And again, if I'm not being impacted by the layoffs and so forth, I'm able to do that. So our home sales forecast for the state of Kansas, we're forecasting across the state, home sales will be up, but just slightly this year, about a 1% increase in home sales. And that increase would be much greater if it weren't for the fact that inventories are so tight. There simply aren't enough homes available, especially in the price points that people want. But as I said, inventories have gotten much tighter even at the upper end of the market, and that's true across most markets in the state. Next year, we're forecasting a modest decline, 1.3% decline in home sales. That's reflecting two things. Number one, inventories will still continue to be very tight. And number two, I believe that we're going to see the impact of the recession spread out and impact broader segments of the economy, more likely to be home buyers. And so demand for home sales will taper off a little bit next year. But when I say that demand will be slightly lower next year, I don't mean that we're going to all of a sudden flip into a buyer's market. Inventories are so tight right now that even if we have demand drop off, we might go from where we're at a 2-month supply right now to a 3 to 4 month supply, and that's still a tight inventory. And so home sales will be down slightly next year, but that's not going to necessarily mean that we're creating any cratering in the housing market. So if you think about the stories that we've been talking about here, we have demand that continues to be very strong and really tight inventories, and so you'd expect home prices would be going up. And in fact, that's what we've seen across the state. This is the year-over-year change in the Federal Housing Finance Agency's home price index for U.S., for Kansas, and then I have this rural Kansas counties. Rural Kansas counties, again, I don't think of Garden City or of Dodge City as being rural areas. You're small cities. But by this definition, what it means is any county in the state of Kansas that's not a part of one of the 5 metropolitan areas. So if you're outside of a metropolitan area, outside of the counties that are part of Kansas City, Lawrence, Manhattan, Topeka, or Wichita, other than that, this is all the other counties, and all of western Kansas would be included in this. Lots of differences across the state. You have different experiences than southeast Kansas, than north central Kansas. But what we've seen here for the state as a whole, home prices on average have been bouncing around appreciation rates of about 5% for about 5 years now. And that's really strong appreciation for Kansas, much stronger than is typical. Really close to on par with the U.S. as a whole, which is unusual. What's even more unusual is that what we've seen here in the last year or so is more typically the non-metropolitan parts of the state appreciate slower than the state as a whole, 2.5% per year. It would be a much more typical home price appreciation. But over the last year or so, we've seen that increase where it's really on par with the state as a whole and with the U.S. And so much stronger appreciation in these non-metropolitan areas. We don't have a specific home price index for Ford County, but what we do have is the median sale price. And the median sale price is the price at which half of the homes sold for more and half of the homes sold for less. And over a long period of time, that can reflect underlying appreciation. Although the other thing it can reflect is a change in what price segment of homes are buying. And so you can see here that there's been a pretty sharp increase over the course of this year in the median sale prices, upwards close to $150,000 in the Dodge City area. And again, that's reflecting two things. Number one, underlying home price appreciation, and a move towards higher end, more expensive homes. So both of those are in play there. Our forecast for the state as a whole is that home prices will increase by about 4.8% this year, followed by another 5.7% next year. That really strong numbers are being driven primarily in the Kansas City and Wichita areas for next year. Matter of fact, our forecast is that Wichita will have the strongest home price appreciation in the state next year. And the final number that we forecast for the state as a whole is new home construction activity. And for a lot of years, new home construction was just kind of flat. If you took out Kansas City in particular, you would just see new home construction activity was just not doing much. For instance, in Wichita, we've been sitting at around 1,000 permits per year for about the last 8 years, just not really increasing. And you might ask, why is that happening? If you've got strong demand and you've got tight inventories, why aren't more builders building homes, filling that void and helping to increase those inventories? And the answer to that is because this chart doesn't go back quite far enough to really show it. From 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, we had a number of years in Kansas where home price appreciation, it didn't crater. We didn't have sharp declines the way that we did for the U.S. as a whole. But we bounced around zero for a lot of years. And during all that time, when existing home prices were not appreciating, we had new construction costs continued to go up. Materials got more expensive. Labor became tighter and tighter supply. And so construction got more and more expensive relative to what existing homes were. And it made it not a very good value proposition to build a new home. In essence, the people who were building new homes were people who wanted what they wanted, they could afford it, and they didn't care if they could buy more value for their money elsewhere. Well, we're finally starting to see that logjam being broken. And so as a result, we're forecasting new building permits to increase 12% this year and another 21% next year. And again, you see that especially in the larger metropolitan areas. But across the state, we're seeing situations where with the low interest rates and more buyers kind of interested in new home construction than have been interested in the past, coupled with existing home prices going up, it's made it easier for new homes to compete. And therefore, we're finally seeing some increases in construction. And I think I'm probably way out of time, and so I will finish that, and then I'm happy to take questions afterwards if we have some time at the very end. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and you all have a great day.